I'm Ella, and for the past 2 years, I've been watching my husband Mark gradually deteriorate. I remember the first time we were told we had stomach cancer. I thought the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Ethan, our adorable 9-year-old child, was only 38 years old and doing well at his job in investment banking. There were supposed to be decades before us. Mark's financial success allowed us to pay for the greatest care available, which was the one silver lining in this nightmare. We spent every available dollar, investigated other medications, and visited doctors across the country. Nevertheless, it became clear as the months went by that this treatment was merely buying time rather than offering a cure. Linda and Robert, Mark's parents, were our rock throughout it all. They only lived 20 minutes away, so they jumped in right away when things got tough. When Mark had to go to therapy, Linda would say, "Ella, we'll pick Ethan up from school today. Furthermore, don't worry about dinner. I have additional lasagna ready." Ethan would often tug on my sleeve, and his eyes were wide with hope and fear when I tucked him in at night. "Mom, when is Dad going to get better?" I had nothing to say. How can a youngster be informed that a parent is dying? I retorted, "The doctors are doing their best, sweetie," while petting his hair. However, things were different with my own parents. Even though Mark's parents lived nearby, my mother, Karen, and father, David, could have easily been on another planet. "Mom, is it feasible for you to come get Ethan from school today? Mark has a bad reaction to the chemotherapy, and Linda has an appointment with her physician. We decided to help your sister look for an apartment today, and I'm so sorry, Ella. You are aware of Jessica's reactions when she is under stress. The one was always Jessica. It has always been that way. My parents missed my school play when I was 7 years old because Jessica had a sick. They left right after the ceremony to attend Jessica's dance recital when I graduated from high school, despite the fact that she was just in the ensemble. It was something I had become used to over the years. Mark became a part of his parents' family, and they treated me more like a daughter than my own ever did. I thus prepared myself for the inevitable, surrounded by the family that had selected me, as Mark's condition deteriorated last month. I was holding Mark's hand the night he passed away. The hospice nurse had told me it wouldn't be long after his breathing had gotten weak hours earlier. "Ella," he said in a scarcely audible whisper, "look after Ethan. The strongest person I've ever met is you." His final words were those. Unable to comprehend that my 12-year companion was no longer with me, I stayed there for hours thereafter, continuing to grasp his hand as it turned cold. Within an hour following my call, Linda and Robert were at the hospital, their faces etched with the same sadness that consumed me. "We're here, sweetheart," Linda exclaimed as she embraced me with her arms. "We'll always be here." I texted my mother that evening, saying, "Mark passed away tonight." An hour later, she said, "It's terrible." Just 2 words. No phone call, no invitation to visit, no inquiry about Ethan and my well-being. However, I was too numb to give a damn. There was a boy to comfort, a funeral to organize, and a life to somehow reconstruct. Funeral preparations, paperwork, and attempting to inform Ethan that his father would not be returning home dominated the days after Mark's passing. Every step of the way, Linda and Robert were there to take care of calls to the funeral home when I was unable to speak and to sit with Ethan when he had questions that I was unable to respond to. I was overwhelmed with details the day before the funeral. I still had to pick up Ethan's suit, distant relatives were phoning for instructions, and the funeral home required final selections on the program. Since Mark's death, I hadn't slept for longer than 2 hours at a time. I told Linda, "I need to ask my parents to watch Ethan," as we sat at my kitchen table with cards of condolence. "You and Robert are already doing so much." I practiced my speech for when we got to my parents' place while I drove Ethan there. With her handbag already in hand and a light jacket on, my mother opened the door. She said, "Ella, this isn't a good time," without even extending an invitation to enter. "We're just heading out. Please, just for a few hours, Mom." We've been making preparations for weeks, and I have to make everything final for the funeral. My father interrupted, coming up behind my mom. We can't cancel now. They both left, shutting the door behind them before I could fight anymore. With firmness, my mother remarked, "We really have to go. I'm sure you can find someone else." Without even saying farewell to Ethan, who was standing there in confusion and pain, they rushed to their car. I contacted my friend Sarah after they left, and she agreed to watch him right away. Curiosity won over after I dropped Ethan off at Sarah's place. On my way home, I took a detour by my parents' house. Jessica's red Mazda was parked in the driveway, and their lights were on. I whispered to myself, "So that's the important plan," as I let out a sour laugh. They had nothing to do. All they wanted was to support Jessica rather than me. Even today, I sent the following to our family WhatsApp group that evening. Mark's funeral is Thursday at Greenwood Chapel at 11:00 a.m. There will be a brief reception after the ceremony. I saw the receipts appear next to the names of Jessica and my parents. Nobody answered. I called my mother straight the night before the funeral because I was so anxious. "I assume you got my message regarding tomorrow's funeral, Mom? It begins at 11 o'clock. The line paused for a moment. "I'm sorry, Ella, but we are unable to attend. In honor of her promotion, Jessica has reserved many tables at Emilio's. We've already committed, and it's lunchtime." I almost dropped the phone. "We're talking about Mark's funeral, Mom. Mark, who covered the cost of fixing your property when the roof fell 3 years ago? Mark, who has been with us for more than 10 years. My mother said, "That was a long time ago, Ella," with a grim expression. "The living, not the dead, should be our first concern. Jessica is in urgent need of our assistance." She hung up before I could answer her. I shook my hand in shock and rage and phoned Jessica's number right away. "Hey," she said, seeming irritated that I had disrupted her night. "Jessica, according to Mom, you're hosting a party tomorrow that coincides with Mark's burial. In order for them to attend the service first, is it not possible to reschedule or at least postpone it?" "No way," she angrily said. "At this time, I am unable to alter the reservation. This promotion is significant, and everyone has already confirmed it. I can't really postpone a funeral party or something like that." "A funeral party?" I said it again, raising my voice. "My husband is dead." "That was ages ago," she brushed off. "Look, a funeral is not as significant as my promotion. Every day, people pass away." Then she also hung up. I was completely taken aback as I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand. My mother sent me a message on my phone, which seemed to further twist the knife. "Stop putting pressure on your sister. The burial is not as essential as her celebration. She put a lot of effort into getting this promotion." The day of Mark's burial came as a stark contrast to the gloom I was experiencing within. The simplicity of the service was exquisite. The little church was crowded with individuals who had truly cared for Mark, his family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers, who had never been one for grandiose displays. I talked about Mark's compassion, generosity, and steadfast dedication to our kid throughout the eulogy. Robert gripped Ethan's hands while tears ran down his cheeks as he sat between Linda and Robert. Many individuals came up to me after the funeral to express their sympathies and inquire about my parents' absence. Mark's roommate from college said, "I was surprised not to see your folks. Are they ill?" "They had a prior commitment," I said sternly, unwilling to go into any detail. After seeing my uneasiness, Linda skillfully changed the topic of discussion. I sat by myself in the living room that evening after everyone had left, surrounded by flower arrangements and condolence cards. Without Mark, the home felt incredibly empty. The quiet was painfully loud. Jessica texted me, "I hope the funeral went well." Then my phone chimed. Mom shared pictures from my celebration. Became a senior account executive after being promoted. There were party emojis and a celebration of her achievement, but no sympathy or recognition of what I had just gone through. Without answering, I switched off my phone and walked upstairs to see how Ethan was doing. He was holding onto the teddy bear that Mark had given him for his most recent birthday while he slept blissfully. The steady pattern of his breathing soothed me as I got into bed next to him. I spent the following week navigating life in a daze. Every day, Linda and Robert stopped by to help me organize Mark's stuff, provide lunch, and take Ethan to the park. Not once did my parents call to see how I was doing, to see how their grandchild was doing, or anything else. A week following the funeral, Mr. Simmons, Mark's attorney, called me. He clarified, "Mrs. Turner, it's time to discuss Mark's will." He prepared in a very comprehensive manner. Would the reading be possible tomorrow afternoon? After agreeing, I contacted Robert and Linda to extend an invitation. Naturally, they were mentioned in the will, and Mark would have preferred that. To exactly 2:00 p.m. the next day, Mr. Simmons showed up to our house with a leather briefcase and a serious countenance that lightened upon seeing Ethan. He shook his little hand. "Your father spoke of you often," he said to my kid. "He was very proud of you." Linda, Robert, Ethan, and I took our seats in the living room, anticipating what I thought would be a simple reading. There wouldn't be any shocks because Mark and I had spoken a lot about his desires while he was sick. However, the doorbell rang just as Mr. Simmons was about to start. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Linda asked, her expression bewildered. "No," I said, just as perplexed. I was about to open the door when I noticed Jessica and my parents waiting on the porch, all of them wearing two sympathetic smiles, and I almost slammed it shut. "What are you doing here?" I asked directly. My mom remarked, "We'd heard about the reading," as she attempted to see past me and inside the home. "You know, Mark wasn't unfamiliar to us. We are entitled to be here. All right?" I said it again incredulously. "You couldn't be bothered to come to his funeral, but you have a right to be at his will reading?" My dad cleared his throat. "There's no need to bring up past complaints now, Ella. Our purpose is to assist you." "Support me?" I gave a sour laugh. That's rich. However, my father and Jessica were right behind me as my mother gently pushed past me before I could seal the door. She assertively stated, "We're family," as though that clarified everything. As they made their way to the living room, I stood there in awe of their boldness. When Linda and Robert saw who had come, their expressions soared. "What are they doing here?" When I got back, Robert murmured. I said, "I have no idea," as my palm trembled in rage, "but I'm not going to make a scene in front of Ethan." Ever the professional, Mr. Simmons simply arched an eyebrow and went on. "Shall we proceed with the reading of the will?" Ethan was sitting in an armchair next to me, while my parents and Jessica were seated on the couch across from Linda and Robert. The tense atmosphere in the room was oppressive. I, Mark Andrew Turner, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament, Mr. Simmons said, opening the official paper. Everything was carefully arranged by Mark. He gave $200,000 to his parents, enough to pay for their comfortable retirement and to express gratitude for their unflinching support during both his sickness and our marriage. We never expected. Robert grabbed Linda's hand tightly as she started, her voice cracking. The primary provisions followed. He gave me $400,000 in financial assets, our home, and 2 flats in the city center that I was unaware he owned. The apartments generate significant rental income, Mr. Simmons clarified. Mark purchased them as investments 3 years ago. As I sat there, I was astounded by how much Mark had planned. He had made sure that Ethan and I would always have enough money. My mother's attitude changed from one of mild compassion to one of undisguised interest as Mr. Simmons went on. Jessica abruptly paid attention and sat up straighter. My mother clapped her hands together when the lawyer was done. "Well, Ella, this is fantastic news, isn't it? You're doing quite well presently." There was silence in the room. Robert and Linda gazed at her with disbelief. "I mean," my mother went on, unaware of the conflict, "you can definitely help out family now with 2 apartments and all that money. Jessica has been having trouble paying her rent, have you not, my love?" Jessica gave an enthusiastic nod. It's so expensive these days, and you have two apartments just sitting there. What I was hearing was unbelievable. They were already examining my husband's assets before he was even cold in his tomb. My father said, "You should give one of those apartments to Jessica," as though it were the most sensible thing in the world. What do you need two for anyway? With my hands balled into fists at my sides, I slowly got to my feet. Are you for real now? You went up uninvited to Mark's will reading to claim his property after ignoring me and Ethan for a week and skipping his burial for a party. Now, Ella, my father began in a patronizing tone, you don't have to be selfish. You have all this riches, yet you're alone now. You ought to distribute it. Selfish. I said it again, raising my voice. I'm not alone myself. Ethan is mine. Additionally, Mark left everything for his son's future. Every dollar will be used to ensure that Ethan has the greatest life, the finest education, and the best possibilities. His father is no longer able to support him. I saw my sister and dad gaze at each other, their eyes darting to Ethan with an expression that uncannily resembled bitterness. When my mother said, "You're being ridiculous," she became angry. Jessica needs help now, not some child who won't even go to college for years. Robert interrupted, "Some child is your grandson," his voice tense with rage, "and his father just died." Anger made my mother's cheeks flush. "Don't you dare tell me how to treat my own grandson," she yelled at Robert. "We've been in this family longer than you have." Linda said icily, "And yet you've shown remarkably little interest in being part of it." I firmly stated, "That's enough," as my patience finally gave out. "Ethan, would you mind spending a short time in your room upstairs? Show Mr. Simmons your model airplanes by bringing him along." The lawyer swiftly got up and seized Ethan's hand, obviously pleased to be out of the family turmoil. "I'd love to see your collection, young man." I stopped holding back and turned to my sister and dad as soon as they were out of earshot. "How dare you enter my home and demand money from my husband only days after his burial, which you couldn't bring yourself to attend? Mark has dedicated his life to supporting Ethan and myself. What assistance did you provide over the 2 years that he fought cancer? Not at all. For several hours, you wouldn't even keep an eye on Ethan." My father started to say, "That's not fair," but I interrupted him. "No. When your roof fell following the storm 3 years ago, Mark had to spend thousands of dollars fixing it, which is unfair. We paid for Jessica's whole college tuition when you said you couldn't afford it, which is unfair. Well, I want to be clear that I will not be handing you any of Mark's assets or money. Not right now. Never. Every dollar will be used to help Ethan and ensure his future. That's what Mark desired, and it will occur." Anger twisted my mother's face. "You are an unappreciative jerk, following all that we have done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I cut you off. "Name something. One act of unselfish parental care." She couldn't think of a response, so she opened and closed her lips. "That's what I thought," I muttered. "I think it's time for you all to leave." Suddenly weary, I fell onto the couch as the door shut behind them. Robert remarked, "You did the right thing," in a kind but stern tone. "Have I? My parents are still there. Jessica is still my sister, too. Biology doesn't make family," Linda shared as she sat next to me and grasped my hand. "Family is made of love. Being there creates family. Family is being there when things get tough." I nodded, still feeling the pain of rejection that had accompanied me all my life, even though I knew she was correct. When I got down to my computer later that evening, after Linda and Robert had left and Ethan was fast asleep, I noticed that my mother had tagged me in a social network post. "I'm devastated that my oldest daughter, who now has 2 flats in the heart of the city and lots of money, has turned so avaricious and self-centered since her husband's passing and won't aid her younger sister. She has transformed as a result of material affluence." As I gazed at the screen, I noticed that family, friends, and relatives who were only aware of the distorted version of the narrative my mother had given them were leaving heartfelt remarks. "Make sure Ella doesn't get away with this. Family should support family. Jessica is constantly having difficulties, but Ella has it all. A wave of rage overwhelmed me like I had never felt before. Even for my mother, attempting to publicly humiliate me into handing them Mark's money was a new low. I inhaled deeply before I began typing. I would tell the public the complete, uncensored narrative of our family's problems if my mother decided to do so. Asterisk. I've been quiet about this for far too long, but I feel compelled to speak up now that my mother has decided to make our personal family issues public. After battling stomach cancer for 2 years, my husband Mark was buried 3 days ago. His funeral was not attended by my sister or parents. Why? Because they believed that my sister's promotion celebration, which she had planned for the same day, was more significant. For those who are unaware, Mark has provided numerous financial assistance to my parents over the years, including covering my sister's full college tuition and significant house renovations. However, they were always too busy to help me throughout his sickness, even if it was simply to watch our son for a few hours. They attended the reading of Mark's will yesterday without being invited. As soon as they found out that he had left me and our son financially stable, they insisted that I give my sister one of our rental properties since, quote, she needs it more than some child. Their 9-year-old grandson, who recently lost his father, is that child. I don't post this to offend them, but I'm sick of being portrayed as the bad guy in a tale when all I've ever done is try to be a nice wife, mother, daughter, and sister. As Mark intended, the funds will be utilized for our son's education and future. I hope this makes everything clear. Asterisk. I've included the screenshots I collected, which include many texts in which they refused to assist throughout Mark's sickness, and the one in which my mother stated that Jessica's party was more important than Mark's burial. Before I pushed the post button, my finger lingered over it for a few seconds. The tone of the comments on my mother's first post radically shifted in a matter of minutes. Is this real, Karen? You went to a party instead of your son-in-law's funeral. I can't believe you'd expect Ella to give away property meant for her son. I find such texts to be alarming. How could you claim that a funeral is less significant than a party? Throughout the evening, I received calls and texts from friends and family who were shocked by my parents' actions and wanted to offer their support. In the comments, my mother attempted to accuse me of lying, but the screenshots were self-evident. She eventually completely removed her first post, but the harm to her reputation had already been done. I discovered hundreds of missed calls from Jessica and my parents when I woke up the next morning. Without checking their voicemails, I banned their numbers. I had no interest in hearing what they had to say. They made every effort to get in touch with me over the next several weeks, sending me letters pleading for forgiveness, while still demanding money, communications via common acquaintances, and even unexpected visits to our home. I remained steadfast in my resolve to remove them from our life each time. They're never going to change, are they? One afternoon, as we were watching Ethan play in the backyard, I asked Linda. People rarely do, she said. Honestly, not fundamentally anyway. It's peculiar. I always believed that I required their affection and approval. I tried to earn it my entire life. However, now... She concluded for me by saying, now you recognize your own worth, and you see that Ethan deserves better than to repeat that cycle. Life had returned to its usual routine 6 months following Mark's passing. Robert and Linda remained a constant in our life, assisting with Ethan's schoolwork and coming to Sunday dinners. After Mark left us, I took over the management of the rental homes, and I was pleasantly surprised by the job. The city center flats proved to be great investments, bringing in a consistent income to help offset the money I had saved for Ethan's schooling. I also used a portion of the funds to purchase stock in businesses that Mark had always supported, and I was pleased to see the dividends come in. I sometimes received updates about Jessica and my parents via the family gossip. They were having financial difficulties. My parents were moaning about the cost of retirement, and it seemed that Jessica had lost her job. Every time, the sender would clumsily imply that maybe I might assist them. I usually gave the same response. I'm sorry to hear they're having trouble, but my responsibility is to my son. I was referred to as unforgiving or chilly by some. Perhaps I was, but I knew I had made the correct decision when I saw Ethan, who was surrounded by people who genuinely loved him and was getting stronger and happier every day. He asked me a question that surprised me one night as I was putting him to bed. "Mom, do you ever miss Grandma Karen and Grandpa David?" I took the moment to think of an honest response without bothering him with mature issues. When I eventually stated, "I miss the relationship I wish we had, but not the one we actually had," he nodded, as if he understood better than a youngster of his age ought to. "I'm glad we have Grandma Linda and Grandpa Robert." "Me too, friend. I agree. Some people would never comprehend my decision to distance myself from my birth family. They had never known the ongoing letdown, the enduring pattern of partiality, or the agonizing insight that some individuals are just not able to prioritize others. However, I got it. More significantly, I had ended the cycle. Being surrounded by individuals who demonstrated their affection for him through deeds rather than simply words would help Ethan grow up recognizing his value. People who were there when it counted, who did not impose restrictions on their assistance, who did not regard him as a tool. I'm 30 years old, and my name is Lucy. My profession is financial analysis, and I'm rather skilled at it. I may be excessively cautious when it comes to money, but that's simply how I am. Being the youngest of two sisters taught me early on that I would have to put in the effort to achieve my goals. Sarah, my sister, is 3 years my senior. She has always been our family's golden child, beautiful, outgoing, and, in our parents' opinion, incapable of doing anything wrong. I'd adore my sister, don't get me wrong, but it was clear from the beginning that our parents were partial to her. The expectations were more important than the money. While I was simply there, they always expected Sarah to succeed with ease. Soon after graduating from college, Sarah married Tom. They soon began having children, and he manages building projects. They currently have 3, young Joey, 2, Lucas, 5, and Emma, 7. Although they are lovely children, Sarah is constantly griping about how difficult it is to keep them in their rental property. I consider myself fortunate in my own way. For the past 5 years, I've been renting a lovely 1-bedroom apartment from my best friend Jenny's parents, who own other properties, at half the going rate. I've never given them any cause to doubt my trustworthiness. Since I started working, I've been saving money rigorously by living below my means, cooking at home rather than going out to eat, and using public transportation whenever I can. Little things like that pile up. My coworkers frequently make fun of me for being overly thrifty, but I had a strategy. I've always wanted a home of my own, preferably a modest rural home. After the epidemic, working remotely became more frequent at our company, and I just had to visit the office for crucial meetings. A serene location outside the city sounded ideal. I finally opened my savings account last week and took a close look at the figures. I saved and planned for years before I got enough money for a down payment on a small country home. I looked at possible houses on real estate websites for hours. I only wanted a comfortable home that I could call my own, nothing too spectacular. My phone rang as I was looking through real estate listings. It was my mom, calling at the ideal moment as always. With that understated tone of authority cloaked in a reminder, she continued, "Lucy, honey, remember we're having you over for dinner on Saturday. Sarah and Tom are coming with the kids, and please try to be on time for once." That Saturday, I got to my folks' suburban home at precisely 5:05 p.m. already. The driveway was crowded. I had to park on the street since Sarah's minivan took up most of the area. I could hear the commotion inside before I even got to the front door. Little Joey's toddler squeals contributed to the commotion, while Emma and Lucas were most likely chasing each other about the house. Sarah, without glancing up from where she was attempting to get Joey to eat his mashed potatoes, said, "Lucy's here," as I entered. The children were so preoccupied with their own world that they hardly recognized me. When Mom fussed over everyone and everything, she was in her element. Dad had already taken a seat in his usual chair and was reading the newspaper. He complained, "Everything's getting so expensive these days," from behind the columns. "Have you seen the gas price? It's robbery on the highway." Tom said, "Tell me about it," as he helped himself to more of Mom's lasagna. "And what a piece of work my boss is. He came in yesterday, correct? Alters the project schedule entirely without even informing the crew. Who does that?" Sarah struggled with Joey's bib and gave her husband a pitying nod. "You get to leave the home at least. Imagine spending your entire day with these three cooped up in a small apartment." I checked my phone under the table, taking advantage of the confusion. I had been admiring this ideal small home with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a lovely yard. Additionally, the cost was within my means. I didn't realize Mom was observing me until she spoke up, since I was so engrossed in the pictures. "What's so fascinating about that phone, Lucy? You didn't even touch your dinner." Everybody looked at me, and my cheeks started to become a little warmer. For some reason, I chose to be honest about work, even though I could have made anything up. "Actually," I said, "I'm examining homes. I'm considering purchasing one shortly." The ensuing hush was deafening. Even the children appeared to notice a shift. Tom's never-ending gripes about his employer ended in the middle of his sentence, and Sarah's fork halted halfway her lips. "Buy a house?" As if she hadn't heard me right, Mom repeated, "You?" "Well, yes," I answered, already feeling guilty for being so honest. "At the moment, I'm simply considering my choices. Nothing is certain." "What kind of house?" Sarah's voice was strangely harsh as she asked, "Where?" I said incoherently, "I haven't really decided yet," in an attempt to change the subject. "This lasagna is fantastic, Mom. Has your recipe changed?" However, I could sense it, the ideas that were going through their minds, the unsaid sentiments that were almost apparent. Sarah continued to ogle at Tom while my parents shared one of those meaningful stares. After a while, the typical supper bustle returned, but something had changed. For the remainder of the evening, it seemed as though everyone was acting out their typical parts, but their thoughts were elsewhere. After a week, I had nearly forgotten about the odd tension during the family meal. I spent my evenings investigating property taxes and mortgage rates because my job kept me occupied. My mother's caller ID began to beep on my phone when I was in the middle of a Zoom conference. She phoned me back 3 times, but I left it on voicemail. She persisted, so I finally phoned her back during my lunch break, anticipating an emergency. "Lucy, finally." There was so much joy in Mom's voice. "I've found you the ideal home. It's so flawless you won't believe it. Martha, who you may know from church, notified me about this listing in her local area. It's perfect." I set down my food and applied pressure to my temple, already sensing the onset of a headache. "Mom, I haven't even asked for help finding a house." However, she was already in the thick of things and couldn't be stopped. "It has 5 bedrooms, not just 4. There are these cute kid-friendly rooms with built-in closets, and the master bedroom is enormous. In addition, a playground has already been set out in the rear. Is it not unbelievable? Additionally, the location is ideal. Both the public library and St. Mary's Elementary School are within walking distance." "Thanks for thinking of me, Mom." I eventually managed to interrupt, "but that's not what I'm looking for at all." The person on the other end paused. "What do you mean?" I inhaled deeply while attempting to speak in a forceful yet compassionate manner. "I'm looking for something completely different. I want a small country house, something cozy just for me. I don't need multiple children's rooms or a playground." Sharply, "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "You can't just think about yourself. You need to plan ahead. This house is perfect. It's even on sale. Martha says the owners are motivated to sell quickly." Forcefully, "I know what works for me," I stated. "I want a quiet place in the countryside where I can work from home. That's what I'm looking for." In her throat, she produced a sound of disapproval. "Well, don't come crying to me when you realize I was right." The line died. I felt a mix of remorse and fury as I gazed at my phone. I didn't have much time to think about it, though, since Sarah's message buzzed on my phone. "Hey sis, check this out." A flurry of connections to real estate listings ensued. They were all enormous city family homes with 4 to 6 bedrooms, lots of baths, and large yards that were close to parks and schools. I texted back quickly. "Thanks, but I'm actually looking for something smaller in the countryside." Sarah's reaction came right away. "However, these offers are very fantastic. This one even includes an in-law suite, so have a look." During afternoon meetings, more linkages continued to appear. Sarah's texts started vibrating on my phone. One house listing after another, each one larger and more geared toward families. Following the 20th property listing, I ceased to monitor Sarah's communications. Rather, I gave a realtor I had discovered through good internet ratings, Amanda Chan, a call. She was known for paying close attention to what her customers had to say, and I needed that. I clarified. "I'm looking for a small, comfortable country house that's not too far from the city. I work from home most days, so having a strong internet connection is essential. Perhaps a little garden where I might cultivate some veggies and herbs." Her eyes brightened when I informed her my spending limit. "I believe I may have just what you're searching for. It was only released yesterday. Do you want to check it out this weekend?" The house was located on a quiet country road, roughly 40 minutes from the city. Something clicked inside of me as soon as Amanda's vehicle pulled into the gravel driveway. The property, a quaint 2-bedroom cottage with dark green shutters and white exterior, was ideal. The front yard was shaded by big maple trees, and there were 2 rocking rockers on the wraparound porch. Sunlight poured into an open-plan living space from wide windows inside. Despite its tiny size, the kitchen was modernized with new equipment and butcher block worktops. One wall of the living area was dominated by a wood-burning fireplace. There was a complete bathroom with a clawfoot tub and 2 small bedrooms above. The sunroom at the rear of the house, however, was the deciding factor. A modest greenhouse and a well-kept garden with raised beds were visible from windows on 3 sides. As we stood in the sunroom, Amanda said, "The owner is motivated to sell quickly. She is prepared to give a 5% discount in exchange for a speedy closing." I didn't think twice. I desire it. The following week was filled with talks, mortgage applications, and paperwork. In order to maintain comfortable monthly payments, I made a greater down payment than was necessary. Every night before bed, I would look at pictures of my future house, deciding what I would plant in the yard and where I would put my furniture. I felt like I was walking on air when everything was finalized and signed. I was eager to tell my family the news. The next Saturday, virtually giddy with anticipation, I traveled to my parents' place for supper, despite their earlier attempts to sway my choice. The children were already there with Sarah and Tom. We sat down to dinner as usual, and Mom prepared her classic pot roast. Around the table were the customary gripes and discussions. Sarah's difficulties with the children's school schedules, Tom's most recent work-related drama, and Dad's economic observations. My gut nodded when Mom turned to face me with a grin. "I'm so happy you're here, Lucy. Barbara next door and I were just chatting. Her home is up for sale. Do you recall Barbara's home? She is prepared to provide us, that is, you, a competitive price. You ought to think about." I interrupted, unable to control myself any longer, saying, "Actually, I've already bought a house." The sound of silverware hitting dishes stopped suddenly. Emma's backdrop cartwheel came to a halt in the middle of its spin. There was complete quiet. I inhaled deeply before I began to describe my new house. Despite the tension at the table, I spoke with passion. About 40 minutes outside of the city is this lovely house. The house has a little greenhouse in the backyard, 2 bedrooms, and the most wonderful sunroom. These lovely raised garden beds belong to the previous owner. Are you feeling insane? The dishes jumped when Dad slammed his hand down on the table. He was more irate than I had ever seen him. The startling boom brought Joey to tears. "What?" I stumbled, really taken aback by their response. "You dare? Mom's face had become a startlingly crimson color. After all we showed you, all those ideal family houses we found, how dare you purchase a home without first speaking with us? I had the impression that I had abruptly entered a strange parallel dimension. Why should I seek your advice before using my own funds to purchase a home? Mom was virtually yelling now, because we had it all planned out. With enough space for everyone, Barbara's house would have been ideal in this neighborhood. A place for everybody? I repeated slowly, becoming more perplexed. I will be the only one residing there. The ensuing hush was deafening. While Sarah sat there looking oddly composed, Mom and Dad exchanged glances. His dish instantly piqued Tom's curiosity. In a tone that chilled my blood, Mom replied, "The plan was actually for Sarah, Tom, and the kids to live there with you, Lucy." I was waiting for the joke as I looked at her. It never arrived. I apologized, but what? I succeeded in choking out. As though it were the most normal thing in the world. Sarah nodded. "Lucy, that flat is so little. The children find it really difficult. We would have had all the room we needed in your house." She grinned as if she were talking about borrowing a sweater. "And we could finally start saving some money since we wouldn't have to pay for utilities or rent." I glanced from face to face across the table, hoping for someone to smile, exclaim "gotcha," or start laughing. However, all I saw were grave expressions, Tom's awkward avoidance, Mom's righteous rage, Sarah's entitled expectation, and Dad's severe disapproval. You all merely thought that I would purchase a home for Sarah's family to occupy. Well, obviously, Mom raised her hands in the air. That is the role of family. We support one another. Assist one another. I said again incredulously. This isn't beneficial. This is assuming that, without even asking, I will house 5 people. Sarah's composed exterior cracked slightly as she remarked, "You're being selfish. You are aware of the difficulties we face in that little flat. Joey's crib is in our bedroom, and Emma and Lucas must share a room. It is unfair to the kids." It was as though I was drowning in madness. As the full force of their expectations struck me, the room appeared to spin a bit. They had all spent weeks strategizing my future and determining how I should spend my money, without once taking into account my desires or even remembering to ask me about them. Mom's voice was harsh with authority as she commanded, "You must immediately cancel this ridiculous purchase. Give your realtor a call as soon as possible on Monday. Barbara's home is still for sale, and it's ideal. It's in the neighborhood, near to all the wonderful kindergartens and schools." No. My chair scuffed the floor as I got up from the table. Fueled by decades of pent-up rage, the word burst out stronger than I had anticipated. Chaos broke out in the dining room. Mom sprang out of her seat and waved her arms. Dad's voice was louder than everyone else's. Sensing the tension in the atmosphere, the children began to wail. "However, we'll be really crowded." As like she hadn't heard me at all, Sarah cried out. "Are you aware of how difficult it will be to transport the children from so far away to school? Tuesdays are Emma's ballot day. Thursdays are Lucas's soccer day." Something inside of me finally snapped, and I wheeled to face my sister. "You're not living in my house, so you won't feel crowded anyplace. Not one of you is. You think that's obvious enough." There was silence in the room. As if I had grown a second head, they all gazed at me. Their shocked, entitled expressions were almost hilarious. "Lucy," Mom said, holding her pearls tightly, "how could you treat your own sister so cruelly?" Their shouts rose again behind me as I picked up my handbag and made my way to the door. I was unable to hear any more words. Their cries were still echoing in my ears when I got into my car and drove home in a fog. Later that evening, as I sat by myself in my apartment, memories began to resurface. Christmas 1999. I got the imitation American Girl doll from the bargain store, while Sarah got the pricey one she wanted. Mom had stated, "They look exactly the same," but they weren't. On our 16th birthday, Sarah received a brand new Volkswagen Beetle with a large red ribbon on top. I inherited Dad's ancient Honda, which had 150,000 miles on it and was prone to malfunctions. High school graduation. Sarah's graduation celebration featured bespoke decor, a professional DJ, and a catered event in the garden. We had too many costs that month, so mine was a modest family meal. During Sarah's college years, our parents paid for all of her expenses, including tuition, accommodation, and board, and even a significant monthly stipend, while she attended her ideal institution. Knowing that maintaining a perfect GPA was my only chance to attend college, I spent my final year of high school applying for every scholarship I could find and staying up late to do so. And suddenly, after years of giving Sarah everything while I labored for pennies, here we were. They just believed they could take over my house, which was the one thing I had done all by myself. They intended to give Sarah my ideal house, just as they had given her everything else. The violent knocking on my flat door began as I was packing my kitchen. Fortunately, the coffee mug I was wrapped in newspaper fell from my grasp and landed on a stack of packing paper. My father's voice burst through the wood. "Lucy, open this door right now. We know you're in there." Still holding the bubble wrap, I froze. There was more thumping. I yelled back, "Go away! I'm not discussing this anymore." Dad's fist rattled the doorframe as he yelled, "Don't you dare talk to us like that. We raised you better than this." I was shaking as I took up my phone. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. I mean it." Making sure they could hear the beep, I purposefully tapped 9 on my phone's keypad. "I'm dialing right now, you ungrateful little." Mom's sudden intake of breath interrupted Dad's curse. Mom's voice had gone as icy as ice. "We'll leave," she said. "But this isn't over, Lucy. You're making a terrible mistake." With my pulse racing, I slipped down against the wall after hearing their footsteps fleeing down the corridor. I was mistaken to believe that would be the end of it. So incorrect. An hour later, Sarah sent the first message, a picture of Emma and Lucas squishing together on their bunk bed. The caption said, "Look how little space they have. Emma is not even allowed to have a desk for her schoolwork." I didn't answer. Then came another picture of Sarah and Tom's bedroom with Joey's cot crammed into the corner. "Every time we go to bed, he wakes up. He is not treated fairly by this. Remove." Sarah started sending me unpleasant messages when I ignored her. They began to arrive at all hours, including 2, 4, and 6 in the morning. "You always were Dad's least favorite. Mom cries herself to sleep because of you. I hope you're happy all alone in that big house while your nieces and nephews suffer." I banned her telephone, Facebook, Instagram, and more, but she continued to use Tom's phone, make new accounts, and even put up phony email addresses to get in touch with me. Then calls began to come in from all directions. Aunt Marie was the first. "Lucy, honey, I just heard what's happening with your sister. Surely you can find it in your heart to help family." Uncle Bob followed. "Kid, you need to think about what really matters here. Family comes first. Your mother is devastated. How could you do this to your own family?" said Susan, my mother's closest friend. Even my mother, who still saw my old high school teacher, Mrs. Peterson, said, "Lucy, I always thought you were such a kind student. I'm so disappointed to hear about the situation with your sister." They all sent the same message. I was harsh, ruthless, and self-centered. To help my sister with her issues, I should sacrifice my home, my aspirations, and my freedom. They all didn't appear to wonder why I was somehow in charge of Sarah's living issue. I had enough of being harassed nonstop for 2 weeks. After changing my number with my cell provider, I only gave it to my place of employment and a few close friends who had not chosen a side in this mess. The day of the move was quite quiet. I made sure my relatives couldn't find the location using well-known local services by hiring a moving company I had never used before. By dusk, I was standing in my new living room, surrounded by boxes and possibilities, thanks to the expert and effective movers. I sat with a cup of tea on my veranda that first night in my cottage, watching the stars come out and listening to the crickets. No sirens, no traffic, no family strife, just tranquility. I felt a tightness that I hadn't even aware I'd been carrying for years suddenly go away. Naturally, I continued to see their social media posts on occasion. Sarah's passive aggressive status updates about selfish siblings and betrayal in the family. Mom's thinly veiled posts about ungrateful children and family responsibilities. And the comments from family friends and relatives who all took sides without knowing the whole story. The problem is that I'm no longer troubled by any of it. I was unable to be affected by their comments in my new haven. In order to see birds using the bird feeder I constructed, I turned the second bedroom into a home office and positioned my monitors to face the window. The raised garden beds that belonged to the previous owner are already bursting with veggies and herbs. My first gardening endeavor is turning out to be unexpectedly successful. My weekend effort was the greenhouse, which gradually filled with plants that gave the area a lively, alive sense. In fact, my productivity at work increased when I wasn't interrupted by my family as much. After seeing, my employer offered me a raise and increased my responsibilities. Without anybody telling me I was wasting my time or should be concentrating on finding a partner instead, I began taking online courses in investing strategy to broaden my knowledge. I did miss the concept of family at times, not my own family's actuality, but the ideal of what a loving family might be. I typically recalled the tranquility I'd earned in return, and those times flew by. I established new acquaintances in the neighborhood, including neighbors who respected boundaries and didn't feel entitled to my time or space, other professionals who worked remotely, and a local gardening organization that met once a month. My family background was unknown to them, and I liked it that way. They didn't know me as the person my family sought to make me into. They knew me for who I am. The irony is that, compared to Sarah, I'm probably staying closer to my parents' initial goals for their girls. They brought us up to be self-sufficient, prosperous ladies. They just never anticipated that I would be the one to carry it out. And they most definitely did not anticipate that I would also be self-sufficient. Self-family is sometimes the finest kind of family you can have, at least until you decide to add to it yourself, according to your own schedule, conditions, and preferences. And for me, that's more than sufficient.